It was late evening, and the small diner on the corner of Maple Street was slowly emptying. The sky outside was a soft mix of orange and gray, the kind of color that made everything look quiet and still. Inside, the old jukebox played a song from another time while a few customers finished their coffee. The smell of fried food and warm coffee filled the air. Parked just outside the diner was a black SUV. The man inside sat alone, his face calm and unreadable. He wore a gray suit, clean and pressed, and dark sunglasses even though the sun was almost gone. To anyone passing by, he looked like a businessman waiting for someone, but the calm in his eyes carried something else: control. His name was Reed. Reed had worked for years in law enforcement, though few people knew exactly what he did. Even within the bureau, most agents only knew bits and pieces of his assignments. His work required silence, patience, and an ability to live between truth and deception. That night, he had stopped at the diner after a long drive, just to grab a cup of coffee before heading home. He had no idea that within minutes everything would change. Across the street, 2 patrol cars were parked near the gas station. The officers inside were watching the diner. They had received an anonymous tip that a dangerous man linked to a secret operation was inside the black SUV. The tip said the man was armed, possibly carrying stolen data from a federal investigation. The message had come from a private number, encrypted and untraceable. The officers had been told to act immediately and not wait for confirmation. When the dispatcher repeated the order over the radio, the lead officer frowned. Something about the situation felt off. Still, orders were orders. Within moments, more units arrived, surrounding the diner from every side. The flashing red and blue lights painted the windows in streaks of color, startling the people inside. Reed noticed the sudden movement outside. He calmly set his coffee cup down and looked through the window. His hand didn't move toward his weapon or his phone. He just sighed quietly, as if he'd seen this kind of thing before. The officers approached his car with their weapons drawn, shouting for him to step out with his hands up. Every person inside the diner turned to the window, confused and frightened. The waitress, a woman in her 50s, froze behind the counter as one of the officers told everyone to stay back. Reed opened the door slowly, showing his empty hands. His voice was steady, polite. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" "Keep your hands where we can see them," one shouted. "Step away from the vehicle." Reed did as told, keeping his tone calm. "I'm a federal agent. My identification is in my inner jacket pocket." But the officers weren't listening. They moved in quickly, cuffing him and pushing him toward the patrol car. Reed didn't resist. He knew arguing would only make things worse. Still, his calmness unsettled them. Most people reacted with anger, confusion, or fear. He didn't. One officer grabbed his wallet and pulled out the ID. The card was genuine. The holographic seal, the serial number, everything matched. Yet the radio crackled again and a voice from dispatch said, "Hold the suspect. Do not release. Higher authority requested." That was when the tension grew thicker. The local police had no idea they were about to step into something much bigger than they understood. As they drove Reed to the precinct, one officer sitting in the front seat kept glancing back at him. "You said you're an agent," he said cautiously. "What division?" Reed looked at him, his expression unreadable. "You don't have clearance for that," he replied. The officer frowned. "You're not making this easy." Reed's voice stayed calm. "I'm not trying to." When they reached the station, they led him inside and placed him in an interrogation room. The room was small, cold, with a single light above the table that buzzed faintly. The walls were painted gray, and there was a camera in the corner, its red light blinking. Reed sat quietly, his hands still cuffed, while the officers argued outside the glass window. The chief arrived a few minutes later, looking puzzled. "What's this about?" he asked. One of the officers handed him the file. "Anonymous tip, sir. Said he's involved in a federal leak, possibly stolen evidence. We confirmed the vehicle and the ID matched." The chief studied the information, frowning. "You ran his name?" "Yes, sir," another officer said. "But it's strange. His record is restricted. We couldn't access most of it. Only a line that says, 'Do not engage without federal authorization.'" The chief's face darkened. "And you brought him here anyway?" The officer hesitated. "We thought it might be fake." The chief sighed heavily. "You might have just made a very big mistake." Inside the room, Reed sat patiently, watching them through the glass. He could tell from their expressions that they were realizing something. He'd seen this look before. Officers realizing they'd stepped on a landmine they didn't know was there. 2 officers entered the room, trying to stay firm. One sat across from him. The other stood by the door. "Mr. Reed," the seated officer began, "we're investigating a situation involving missing federal property. Until we can confirm your credentials, we have to ask a few questions." Reed nodded slightly. "Go ahead. Where were you 2 nights ago around 10 p.m.? "Working," Reed replied. "Doing what?" "Following orders from people who know more than you do." The officer frowned. "We're just trying to do our job." "I know," Reed said softly. "That's why I'm not angry. But you need to make a call before you go any further." The officer looked at him suspiciously. "A call to who?" Reed didn't answer. He just leaned back, looking calm, like a man who had already calculated every possible outcome. Outside the room, the chief was already making that call. He spoke quietly into his phone, his voice low and tense. "Yes, this is Captain Lewis from Precinct 12. We have a man in custody claiming to be an FBI agent named Reed." "Yes, that's right. The ID looks real, but the file's restricted. We need confirmation." He listened, nodding slowly, then his face went pale. "Understood," he said, hanging up. He turned to the officers. "Nobody touches that man. Nobody opens his briefcase. Nobody even talks to him until further notice." But by then, one officer had already brought the briefcase from the SUV. It sat on the desk in the evidence room, locked with a digital code. The officer who found it thought he was being helpful. He placed it beside the folder, curious about what was inside. The moment he touched the lock, a faint beep came from inside the case and the screen flashed red for a second, before going dark again. When the chief saw it, his voice rose sharply. "Who told you to move that?" I thought it was standard evidence procedure, not when it's marked with a federal security tag." The chief snapped. "Get that out of here and don't touch it again." The officer stepped back, clearly shaken. He had never seen the chief so tense. Meanwhile, Reed remained calm inside the room. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't demand answers. He simply waited, his hands folded neatly on the table. To anyone watching, he looked more like the interrogator than the one being interrogated. After nearly an hour, the chief entered. His voice was quiet, respectful now. "Agent Reed," he said carefully, "there's been a misunderstanding. We received a call from the Bureau confirming your identity." Reed looked up, expression unchanged. "And the source of the tip?" "We're still tracing it," the chief said. "But it came from outside our system." Reed nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." He stood as the chief unlocked his cuffs. For a moment, no one spoke. The air in the room felt heavier than before. Even the younger officers, who had once been confident, now avoided eye contact. They could sense something deeper, something they weren't supposed to know. Reed straightened his jacket, thanked the chief politely, and asked, "Where's my vehicle?" "It's being released," the chief replied. Reed walked toward the door, but before stepping out he paused and said quietly, "If that briefcase has been moved, you might want to check the building's systems. Sometimes it records more than you think." Then he walked out into the cool night air, leaving the officers in silence. Outside, the flashing lights were gone. The diner was closed now, empty and quiet. Reed got into his SUV, started the engine, and drove away slowly. His face remained calm, but his mind was already working through the puzzle. Who had sent that tip and why now? Back inside the precinct, the officers checked the surveillance room and found that somehow, every camera in the evidence room had gone black for exactly 7 minutes, the same time the briefcase had been touched. No one could explain it. And as the clock moved toward midnight, the entire station felt uneasy. They all knew something wasn't right. None of them could shake the image of the calm man in the gray suit, his quiet voice, his unshakable calmness. For most of them, it was just another strange night on the job. But for Reed, it was the beginning of something far larger, a chain of events that would soon pull everyone into a truth they weren't ready to face. The night after the incident at the diner, the small police precinct felt heavy and tense. The officers pretended everything was normal, but everyone knew it wasn't. Something about that night had left a mark they couldn't forget. The man they arrested, the one who called himself Agent Reed, was gone now, but his presence lingered like a shadow in every hallway. In the morning, the chief arrived early, looking tired and uneasy. He hadn't slept much. The phone call from Washington still echoed in his head. He knew what it meant when someone said internal authorization only. It meant there were people far above his rank who didn't want anyone asking questions. He poured himself a cup of coffee, stared out the window, and tried not to think about the briefcase sitting in the evidence room. At around 9, 2 men in dark suits walked in. They didn't introduce themselves. They just showed a paper with the Bureau's seal and said they were here to collect certain items. The chief led them to the evidence room in silence. When they reached the metal table, the briefcase was still there, untouched since last night. The men inspected it without speaking, then one of them placed it inside another case, this one locked with both a digital code and a fingerprint scanner. Was this opened? One of them asked. The chief shook his head. Not by us. We followed instructions. The man nodded once. Good, you did the right thing. Then they left as quickly as they came. No one saw what car they got into, and the security cameras near the front door suddenly went dark again for exactly 2 minutes. When they came back on, the men were gone. The younger officers exchanged nervous glances. What's going on? One whispered. Was that guy really FBI? More than that, another replied quietly. You saw how they reacted. Whoever he is, he's not just some agent. He's someone they don't want us to even talk about. Later that afternoon, one of the officers, the same man who had touched the briefcase the night before, began feeling strange. He told his partner that he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He kept glancing over his shoulder as if someone was there. When he finally sat down, he whispered, When I touched that case, it wasn't just metal. It felt alive somehow. His partner told him to relax, that he was just stressed. But deep down, neither of them could forget the pale look on his face last night. The way his hand trembled as if he'd touched something more powerful than electricity. Meanwhile, somewhere outside the city, Reed was driving along a quiet country road. He had spent the night in a small motel under a different name. His face was calm, but his eyes told another story. He was worried. Not for himself, but for what was coming. He parked near an old rest stop and took out a secure phone from the glove compartment. The screen lit up with a code instead of contacts. He entered a sequence, and after a few seconds, a voice answered. Report. Reed's tone was low and firm. The tip reached local law enforcement before I could intercept it. They detained me for 2 hours. The briefcase was compromised but not opened. The voice on the other end paused, then said, Compromised how? Handled, moved, logged in local evidence, Reed said. There was another pause. Then the voice said, That's enough for a signal trace. They'll know where it was. I know, Reed replied quietly. I'm already on the move. Good. Go dark for 72 hours. We'll send instructions when it's safe. The line went dead. Reed turned off the phone and placed it in the glove compartment again. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling of the car. For the first time in a long while, he felt tired. He had worked years to uncover a hidden network inside federal operations. People who had been selling information, manipulating cases, and using law enforcement as pawns. Now they knew he was close. Back at the precinct, the chief was going through his reports when the phone rang again. He hesitated before answering. Captain Lewis, he said. The voice on the other end was calm but cold. You detained one of our agents last night. Yes, sir. It was a misunderstanding. We received a tip. From who? That's what we're trying to find out. The number was masked. The voice stayed quiet for a moment, then said, If you value your career, Captain, you'll forget last night ever happened. The report stays internal. No names, no transfers, no leaks. Do you understand? The captain hesitated. Yes, sir. And Captain, the voice added, if anyone from your department speaks about this, we'll know. The line clicked. And the call ended. The captain sat there for a long moment, staring at the silent phone. He knew enough to recognize a warning when he heard one. He took the report file, locked it inside his drawer, and threw the key into his pocket. But even though he tried to bury the memory, the feeling didn't go away. That night, he sat in his office long after everyone had gone home. He kept replaying the moment he looked into Reed's eyes, the quiet confidence, the calm expression, the way he had said, You need to make a call before you go any further. It didn't sound like arrogance. It sounded like a warning. Meanwhile, one of the younger officers, curious by nature, decided to do some digging. His name tag read Coleman, and he had only been with the department for 2 years. He was the kind who couldn't leave a mystery alone. That night, while everyone was busy with paperwork, he logged into the internal database and searched the name Reed. The system flashed red. Access denied. He tried again using a backdoor login he had learned from an IT friend. This time a single file appeared, a short note that read, classified. Level 7 clearance required. Contact denied. He leaned back, frowning. He'd never seen a level 7 tag before. The highest clearance he'd ever encountered was level 4, used for Homeland Security cases. Before he could exit the system, his screen froze. A message appeared in bold letters. Unauthorized access attempt logged. Then the screen went black. The next morning, Coleman's computer wouldn't turn on, and his access card stopped working. When he asked IT what happened, they told him his credentials were being reviewed. From that point, he knew he'd touched something he shouldn't have. By evening, the strange feeling in the station grew stronger. Calls from higher offices came more frequently, but no one ever left their names. 2 unmarked vehicles were spotted parked across the street for hours. When one of the officers approached them, they drove off without a word. The staff began whispering that something big was going on, something they weren't supposed to be part of. Even the captain avoided eye contact with most of them now. 3 days later, everything suddenly went quiet. No more calls, no more cars outside. The tension seemed to fade. Life at the precinct returned to normal, or at least that's what everyone tried to believe. Then one night the lights flickered again. The power cut out for about a minute. When it came back, the security system had rebooted, and every recording from the night of the arrest was gone. Every camera feed, every audio file, even the timestamp logs had been erased. When the captain called the tech department, they said, "It looks like the system was wiped remotely. We didn't do it." He didn't ask any more questions. In another part of the city, Reed met with a contact in a quiet underground parking lot. The man waiting for him looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder. "You shouldn't be here," the man said in a low voice. "They're watching everything now." "I don't have a choice," Reed replied. "The leak is closer than we thought. Someone on the inside knew my location before the report even reached Washington." The man looked at him with concern. "So what do you need from me?" "I need to know who sent that anonymous tip. Trace the source. Don't go through official channels." "That's risky," the man said. "So is the truth," Reed replied. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Reed handed him a small device. "This has encrypted data from the last 3 months. If anything happens to me, make sure it gets to the internal security division, not the public office. You'll know who to call." The man nodded, taking the device carefully. "Be careful, Reed. You're in deep water." Reed gave a faint smile. "I've been in worse." As he drove away, the city lights blurred in the reflection of his windshield. He could feel the weight of something closing in, something unseen but powerful. He wasn't just fighting to clear his name anymore. He was fighting to expose a network that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Back at the precinct, the captain locked the empty evidence shelf and turned off the lights. As he walked out, he thought he heard something, like a soft hum coming from where the briefcase used to be. He turned, but the room was dark and still. He stood there for a moment, uneasy, then closed the door behind him. That night, he dreamed of the man in the gray suit, sitting calmly under a buzzing light, saying words he couldn't forget. "You need to make a call before you go any further." The night was cold, the kind of cold that made the air feel heavy. The precinct was quiet but not peaceful. Everyone was on edge after the power outage that wiped the recordings. No one said it out loud, but they all knew something wasn't right. The captain sat in his office staring at the blank monitor. He had already reported the system failure to the regional office, but the response he got back made his stomach turn. It said, "Do not attempt to restore lost data. The matter is being handled at a higher level." He knew what that meant: don't ask questions and don't dig any deeper. But one thing kept bothering him. The briefcase. He couldn't stop thinking about it. What was inside it? Why did everyone from Washington seem terrified of it being touched? And most of all, why did the officer who handled it still look pale days later, as if something inside him hadn't recovered? That officer, Daniel, hadn't come to work since that night. When the captain called him, his wife answered and said Daniel was unwell. She said he woke up in the middle of the night sweating and shaking, saying he kept hearing a strange humming sound that wouldn't stop. The captain told her to take him to a doctor, but deep down he knew no doctor could explain it. Meanwhile, across town, Reed was still in hiding. He had moved from one safe house to another, changing vehicles and using unmarked routes. Every time he turned on his secure phone, the first thing he checked was whether the signal trace was clean. He knew someone was watching. He just didn't know who. For years, Reed had been working on a covert assignment that not many inside the Bureau even knew existed. It wasn't about drugs, weapons, or spies. It was about corruption inside their own system. People in power who were using classified programs for personal gain. When he discovered how deep it went, he realized he couldn't trust anyone, not even those who called themselves his allies. That's why he had that briefcase. It contained evidence, names, transfers, coded messages, all of it locked under biometric encryption. Only he had access to it. When the local police took it that night, his mission almost collapsed. But what he didn't know was that the briefcase had built-in countermeasures. The moment someone unauthorized touched it, it activated a silent signal, one that sent a trace back to its source. That's why the men from the Bureau came to collect it so fast. Not because they cared about him, but because they wanted to make sure the data never saw daylight. Back at the precinct, the captain tried to move on. New cases came in, the daily routines returned, and the week passed quietly. But one afternoon, something happened that brought all the fear back. A delivery arrived at the front desk, an unmarked package with no return address. The clerk brought it to the captain's office, thinking it was routine mail. The captain looked at the box for a long moment. It wasn't large, but it felt heavy. He noticed a small label on the corner that read, "For internal review." He called his assistant. "Did anyone order this?" "No, sir," she said. It just came with the morning mail. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope and a small metal card. The envelope contained a note typed on plain white paper. "If you want to know what really happened that night, check the footage stored in the backup drive. And don't trust the system logs." The captain's heart pounded. The system had been wiped, or so they were told. But what if someone had secretly stored a copy? He looked at the metal card again. It was a security drive, the kind used for encrypted storage. He waited until the station was quiet that night before plugging it into his office computer. The screen flickered and a single video file appeared. The label read Room 2A 221437. He clicked it. The footage showed the interrogation room from that night. Reed was sitting at the table, calm and still, as two officers prepared to do the standard body check before booking. Everything looked normal at first. One officer checked his pockets, another took his phone. Then the moment came, the one that no one had ever talked about. The officer reached inside Reed's jacket and pulled out a small metallic object. It was no bigger than a lighter, but it glowed faintly with a blue light, pulsing slowly like it was alive. The moment his hand touched it, the lights in the room flickered. The officer stumbled back, gasping, his eyes wide. He dropped the device, which rolled onto the floor, still glowing. The second officer bent to pick it up, but Reed said sharply, "Don't touch that." The video froze for a second, static interference, and when it resumed, the officer was standing pale-faced, breathing heavily. The room went completely silent. The faint humming sound that had been in the background grew louder through the speakers, vibrating like a pulse. Then, suddenly, the screen went black. The rest of the recording was gone. The captain sat frozen, staring at the screen. His throat felt dry. He replayed the file, but it ended at the same point every time. Whatever that object was, it wasn't ordinary. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "What did we do that night?" Meanwhile, far from the city, Reed met again with his contact in a safe location, an old storage facility on the edge of an abandoned industrial park. He handed over a new drive, smaller but encrypted. "This contains everything they erased," Reed said. "System backups, trace logs, even communications from inside the Bureau. But I can't decode them alone." The contact looked nervous. "You're risking everything by holding this," Reed nodded. "I already have. They tried to erase me once. I won't give them a second chance." Back at the precinct, the captain couldn't stop thinking about the video. He couldn't tell anyone. Doing that would end his career, but he couldn't ignore it either. That night he drove to Daniel's house to check on him. Daniel looked worse than before. His eyes were dark, his skin pale, and his hands shook as he held a cup of water. "Captain," he said quietly, "it's been 3 days and I still hear it." "Hear what?" the captain asked. "The sound. The humming. It's in my head now. It started when I touched that thing. It was cold, but not metal cold. It felt alive, like it was breathing. I can't explain it." The captain didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell him it was just stress, but he knew it wasn't. There were too many coincidences. Too many strange things happening at once. As he drove back, he noticed a car following him, a black sedan with tinted windows. He changed lanes twice, took a sudden turn, but the car followed each time. Finally, when he pulled into the police parking lot, it drove past without slowing. He stood there for a long time, staring at the road, knowing he was being watched. That same night, a call came through the emergency line. It wasn't a voice, just static. Then a faint sound came through, like someone whispering, "Don't trust them." The line cut. The following morning, the captain found a sealed envelope on his desk. It had no name, just a single line written on the front. "He's coming back." He opened it, and inside was a photo, grainy, taken from a traffic camera. It showed Reed's SUV heading toward the city. The captain leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He didn't know whether to feel fear or relief. That evening, the front desk officer came rushing in. "Captain, you need to see this." On the security monitor, a figure walked into the lobby. Gray suit, calm stride, expression unreadable. It was Reed. He stopped at the front desk, handed over a small envelope, and said politely, "For the captain." Then he turned and walked out before anyone could ask a question. The captain opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a note. "You were right to question. They erased the files, but not the truth. What you saw in that room wasn't a weapon, it was proof. Keep it safe because they'll come for it next." There was also a small key attached, the kind used for encrypted drives. The captain sat there for a long moment, feeling a chill run through him. Whatever was happening wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Outside, the city lights flickered again for a few seconds, just like that night. And somewhere in a room far from there, unseen people were watching a screen filled with his precinct's camera feeds. They knew Reed had returned. And this time, they wouldn't make the mistake of letting him walk away so easily. The air inside the small police station felt heavier than ever that night. Everyone had gone quiet after what happened in the interrogation room. The officer who touched the strange device still sat at his desk, trembling slightly, sipping water. Nobody could explain what had happened. They all saw the flash of light, the way the lights flickered and how his face turned white. It wasn't something anyone could just forget or laugh off. It was something they all felt deep in their gut. Something was very wrong. Inside the room, the man they had arrested sat still, calm as ever. His hands were cuffed, resting on the metal table, but he didn't look nervous or angry. He just looked patient, like someone waiting for everyone else to catch up to what he already knew. The 2 younger officers who had been questioning him earlier now stood outside the door, whispering quietly. One of them said, "What do we even do now?" "That call from Washington, what does it mean?" "They told us not to touch anything, but it's already done." The other replied, "I don't know, man. I've never seen anything like this before. That badge, that device, it's way above our pay grade." Their voices carried down the hallway and everyone else could hear them. The captain stood near the front desk, his hands on his hips, staring at the blinking phone light. It had rung twice already that night, both times from numbers he didn't recognize. Each time, the voice on the other end sounded colder, calmer, and more serious than the last. The captain was a man who had seen his fair share of trouble, but tonight even he looked unsure. Finally, the phone rang again. Everyone froze. He stared at it for a moment before picking it up. His tone changed instantly, firm but respectful. "Yes, this is Captain Miller," he said. There was a pause, then a long silence as he listened. Whatever he heard made his eyes widen slightly. "Yes, sir." "I understand," he said finally. "Yes, he's here." "No, we haven't done that." "All right." When he hung up, no one dared to speak. He took a deep breath, straightened his uniform, and walked toward the interrogation room. The hallway was so quiet that everyone could hear the sound of his boots on the floor. He stopped in front of the door, looked back at the other officers, and said quietly, "No one says a word about this to anyone. Not to their families, not to the press, not even to each other. Understood?" Every officer nodded. No one dared to argue. He opened the door slowly and stepped inside. The man lifted his head, calm as ever. "I assume they told you to let me go," he said softly. The captain looked at him for a moment before answering. "They did, and they said something else." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the key to the cuffs. "They said you're not under our jurisdiction." "You never were." He unlocked the handcuffs, the click echoing in the room. The man rubbed his wrists slightly, as if the metal hadn't bothered him at all, then stood up. "You did your job," he said quietly. "You followed procedure. There's no shame in that." The captain crossed his arms. "What was that thing in your jacket?" "What just happened to my officer?" The man gave him a calm look. "He'll be fine. What he touched wasn't meant for human contact. Let's leave it at that." "That's not an answer," the captain said. "It's the only one I can give," the man replied. "Sometimes knowing less keeps you safe." There was a long silence between them. The captain finally nodded, realizing he wasn't going to get anything more. The man adjusted his jacket, then reached for his briefcase on the table. As he walked toward the door, the captain stepped aside. "You mind telling me who you really are?" he asked. The man paused at the doorway and looked back. "Someone who works for the same flag you do," he said, "just from a different floor." Then he walked out, leaving the captain standing there staring after him. Outside, the air was cool and still. The streetlights flickered slightly, and the sound of distant traffic hummed in the background. The man walked toward the exit, every step measured and calm. 2 patrol cars were parked near the entrance, their engines off. A few officers were standing there watching him leave. One of them, a young officer with a nervous look on his face, stepped forward and said, "Sir, can I just ask, were we in danger?" The man looked at him for a moment and then said softly, "You were lucky." Then he turned and got into a black car that had somehow appeared outside without anyone noticing. The windows were tinted dark and the engine purred quietly. He got in and within seconds it was gone. No one saw who was driving it, and no one could remember hearing it pull up in the first place. Back inside the station, everyone stood in silence. The captain came out of the interrogation room and headed straight for his office. The officer who had been shocked earlier was feeling better now, though his face was still pale. He kept saying the same thing over and over. "When I touched that thing, it wasn't electricity. It was like I saw something, just for a second." But no one wanted to ask what he saw. No one wanted to think about it. In the captain's office, the phone rang one last time. He picked it up slowly. The same cold voice from before spoke again. "Captain Miller, thank you for your cooperation. You did the right thing tonight. What happened here will be classified. Do not file a report. Do not mention the name of the man you detained. This incident did not happen. Do you understand?" The captain swallowed hard. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "Good," the voice replied. "And Captain, make sure your men stay quiet. There will be consequences if this gets out." The line went dead. He sat there for a while, staring at the phone, feeling a strange chill run down his spine. He had handled hundreds of arrests, but nothing like this. It wasn't fear of the man, they could all tell he wasn't dangerous. It was fear of the unknown, of realizing that something existed beyond what they understood. When he stepped back out, the room had gone still again. The officers looked at him, waiting for some kind of explanation or reassurance, but he didn't have any. All he said was, "You all heard what I said earlier. This stays between us. Nobody mentions it again." He walked toward the back window and stared into the night. Outside, the street looked peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But inside the station, everyone could still feel the tension in the air. One of the officers finally broke the silence. "Do you think he was telling the truth? That he's one of us, just higher up?" The captain didn't turn around. "I think we should hope that's all he was," he said. Another officer added, "What if that device was part of some experiment or something classified? Maybe it wasn't even government." "Maybe." "Enough," the captain said sharply. "We're not going to play guessing games. It's over." But it wasn't really over. Every officer in that building would remember that night for the rest of their lives. They would remember the calm look on the man's face, the sudden flicker of lights, and the way the captain's hands trembled after that final phone call. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, the captain stayed behind. He sat alone at his desk, looking at the empty file that had once contained the arrest report. He had been ordered to destroy it, and he had. But part of him couldn't let go of the feeling that this wasn't the end of it. He opened his drawer and took out the broken cuff that had snapped earlier when the man was freed. He turned it over in his hand, staring at the faint burn mark near the lock. It was smooth and round like it had melted without heat. He couldn't explain it. He doubted anyone could. When he finally stood up to leave, he looked around the quiet station one last time. The desks were empty, the lights dimmed, the hallway silent. But for some reason, he could still feel the man's presence, as if the air itself hadn't settled after he left. Outside, the night sky was clear, the stars faintly visible. The captain locked the station door, got into his car, and started the engine. As he drove home, he couldn't stop thinking about one thing: the words the man had said before leaving. Sometimes knowing less keeps you safe. For the first time in his life, the captain believed it.